Welcome, everybody, to Treign Up Academy's deep dive into the models of learning that underpin our methodology. So, we will be walking through our four outcomes, organizing the models under those so that you have a better understanding, especially as a parent, on the why we do the things that we do, why we have the different systems in place that we have at the school, so that you can understand, have more buy-in, and even utilize some of these concepts at home. So for most of you, you've heard us talk through the four outcomes that we are trying to achieve through the school. The first is Christ-like character. The second is 21st century skills. The third is a love of learning. And fourth is athletic development. And within each of these outcomes that we're aiming for, there is like one idea that we try to hammer home with each. And so for identity and character, what we are trying to shift the mindset of and the identity around for each of our learners that come through the school is to move from a victim mindset to a victor mindset. So excited to walk through that. The first model that we want to talk through, it's a cornerstone model, is known as character drives the process, which drives the results. And I first came across this model back in 2016 as I was working with some other sports teams, and this is from Brett Ledbetter. And essentially, what he did was he researched maybe about 100 different sports coaches that were highly successful in their field. And what he found was that most of them emphasized the importance of character as a team and as the individuals as a part of their team, and what role that played in the results that they got. And it makes sense. For thousands of years, this is not new. Philosophers have talked about how character is destiny. And we believe that is absolutely true here at the school. And we want to try to think more deeply around what is character and why it is so important, and how we actually shape it, not just by informing, but usually through creating experiences that shape uh, the, the spirituality, the psyche of each learner. So to walk through this model, essentially what this means is, if you look at the breakdown that he has, there's two verticals there. One is performance skills. The second is moral skills. And for the first one, performance skills are skills related to how we interact with ourselves, and moral skills is how we interact with others. And I do like how he breaks this down. We'll take one example. Let's use hardworking. If I am the type of person who is a hard worker, I am more likely to say, get up early and go work out routinely. And if I do that day after day after day, and it becomes a habit, that becomes my process. The process being defined as the things that we do in the present moment. In psychology, we might just call that behavior. So our character drives our behaviors. And if we have certain behaviors exhibited over time, that puts us in a certain position. And that position can either help us have a higher probability of success or a lower one. And it's these character skills that really drive this process. So the question for us, and when I back in 2016-17 really started to get into, is, well, what is it that really drives character? There's something that is driving these virtues and these values, these character skills that we have. The next part of this is the narrative theory of identity. And there's a number of different models and theories around identity. I think this is one of the best and maybe most true. And the narrative theory essentially just says that we interpret life through story, and we are the story that we tell about ourselves. And so it is very important to be intentional about how we craft that narrative, because it shapes what we believe. It shapes how we perceive the different experiences that we go through in life. And your child is constantly telling themselves a story, and oftentimes about failure and about who they are becoming in the context of the school, as they struggle to work through a lot of the things that we allow them to struggle and work through. So the model or picture and the visual that you see in front of you is, in many ways, our approach to the truth about who he is, Jesus, who we are as the body of Christ, who each of us are individually. And from these three truths, we call this the therefore box. Therefore, I do things that are uh, congruent with the truths that the Bible has. And what's, in many ways, what's amazing about the Bible is it creates, and not many religions do this well, it creates this biblical worldview that answers, it's a coherent narrative. It's answers, where did we come from? Why are we here? And where are we going? And so, just a few notes about this. The Bible's clear about who He is. He is the one who has saved us. He is our shepherd. He leads the way. We, as the body of Christ, are co-heirs with Him. We are a royal priesthood. And I am a conqueror, an overcomer through the Spirit. I am now free and redeemed. And therefore, I co-labor with Him, and I do things that allow me to abide in Him, live in the Spirit, and go and do His will. Now, another model around character that we talk about often and use to frame decision making on how we can improve the character of the learners at the school is known as the 3 C's. So character is not something that you download. It's something that's forged slowly through what we choose, what we're surrounded by, and what we take in. And so at Treign Up, we frame character formation through those 3 forces. It's the choices that we make, because you are what you repeatedly do. Excellence, therefore, is not an act, but a habit. I'm sure you all have heard that quote before. And the choices, it's basically our character is the sum of repeated decisions that we make. And every day we're making decisions that can improve our character or diminish it. The next one is around community. And many of you have heard that you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And so if we want to improve our character, it's important that we surround ourselves with a community of people that have higher levels of expectations and beliefs about who we are and what we can do and what we're capable of, and who exhibit it. And the last one is consume. And this is something from psychological warfare that I found to be increasingly more and more important and prevalent in today's society, especially when we're constantly consuming information. Many of you have probably heard the song, "Oh, be careful, little eyes, what you see. Oh, be careful, little eyes, what you see. For the Father up above is looking down in love. Be careful, little eyes, what you see." And then it goes into what you hear, where you go. So this idea of what we consume shapes us in ways that we do not understand. And so the movies that we watch, the music, the movies that we watch, the social media that we consume, it is highly deceptive. And we want to be careful about the things that we're consuming because it shapes us deeply. All right, now this is something that I came across many years ago as well, absolutely rooted in psychology. People like Carl Jung and other psychoanalysts are talk about this quite a bit too, and I think it's very true, even from what we see biblically. So every learner, every adult, we carry in ourselves, our minds, our spirits, even sometimes, these scripts and these scars that shape how we see ourselves, how we handle challenges, and how we relate to others. It's very much related to what we talked about earlier, which is the narrative theory of identity. So if we want to shape people and their character, make them more resilient, we can't just give information. We have to help them face and rewrite the deeper story that they're living in. So let's start with scripts. So scripts are these subconscious beliefs or these internal messages that we form, especially early on in life, usually between 0 and 7. And these aren't logical. Some examples of scripts might be, I have to be perfect to be loved. I'll never be good enough. If I fail, I'll be rejected. These scripts become these automatic thought loops. We don't even realize that we're operating from. And then scars are more of these emotional imprints that are left by wounds. And there's usually It's moments where something's gone wrong and our hearts made some meaning out of it. It could be a teacher's comment, a parent's absence, a moment of public failure. Scar is not just the moment, but the story that we internalize from it, just like we talked about with the script. So when a learner holds a script of I'm not smart, or if I try and fail, I'll be exposed, there's not any amount of information or curriculum in the classroom that we can provide that's going to help them a ton. Scripts can lead to avoidance and perfectionism, shutting down, blaming others. And unless those inner beliefs are named and challenged, learning oftentimes stays very shallow. And so, what at Treign Up Academy we feel like is so important is create this space where healing and identity formation can happen, especially by affirming what is true. What is true. And if we go back to the four boxes that we had around that narrative theory of identity, those things that are true about what the Bible says, that is the foundation for identity. And we can constantly and consistently go back to that and point our learners to the thing that is true about who they are and who we are. The next one is from a book from John Mark Comer. And I think basically the title of the book is this. It's Abiding, Becoming, and Doing. His book's called Practicing the Way. And this is something that we feel I realize is a very succinct way to describe the reality of Christianity, essentially, and something that have taken and are using. So, abiding in Christ, basically the Spirit. We have to turn our attention to the Spirit, to Him. We have to turn our attention there, and through that, by putting our attention in different ways, we can start to become more like Him, and we are more likely to exhibit behaviors and decisions that are more in line when we abide. And then ultimately, as we become more like Christ, which is what we're called to do as apprentices, we start to do what He did. And we love this model. It's very simple. And so one of the things we do every single day or multiple times per week is what we call training time, where we have the opportunity for our learners to just turn their attention to Him and to try to listen and hear His voice. And we read the Bible, and we memorize scripture, and we reflect on it. We have conversations. We have these things that are called wonder questions, where especially at the younger ages, we just ask questions like, man, I wonder what it was like to be in the garden. And what we do is we use this Socratic nature that we love about Acton and Treign Up Academy, just asking questions similarly to how Jesus taught. And when we think about how Jesus taught, what He did oftentimes was He rarely lectured a ton. He asked questions that brought people in to understand more deeply and to think more deeply about what was true. The next one is Hero's Journey, and this is a core model for Acton and Treign Up Academy. It fits perfectly with, again, what we're trying to affirm them in, the narrative theory of identity, and having them see this, first of all, their life, but certainly at the school as they're going to be getting into these struggles and frustrating, sometimes emotional events, is taking the hero's journey model and visualizing that so they can understand where they're at and what they have to do to overcome. And if you're not aware of what the hero's journey is, this is something that Joseph Campbell in the mid 1900s, I think, found about all of these, found the research around some of the greatest stories that exist and realized many of them had these common characteristics. And I won't go into the details of all of them, but basically there's this universal pattern where an individual who was not what they could be was in an ordinary world. They had this call to an adventure. And when they accepted that, they came across a mentor who helped them along the way, who they then had to face these trials and obstacles. And then at the end, as they returned home after they faced the dragon and their fear, and they overcame that, as they were returning home, they were transformed by that experience. And every learner at Treign Up is invited into that journey and struggle when it happens, because it happens frequently with the nature of the learner-driven model. Struggle is not failure. It's just a part of the story. And parents often come in and try to rescue, which is our next model, or it's coming up soon. They'll try to rescue and they'll try to remove obstacles instead of asking, what is the stage that my child is in and how can I help to coach them and encourage them in the struggle so that they can see that they have what it takes to overcome and to, even in this frustrating moment, push through to the other side where they can be transformed. So great transition here into the drama triangle. We talked earlier about this higher level idea that we are trying to move our learners from a victim mindset to a victor mindset, which is true about who they are. Victim at the bottom there is the individual that's always saying, oh, it's poor me, everything is against me. Oftentimes I'll focus on the rescuer. This is the parent that will come in and try to save them. And this triangle is very toxic in home and schools and teams. And so what we try to do is flip at Treign Up Academy this triangle upside down. We try to move that victim mindset, remove that and give them the victor mindset in this drama triangle. It's known as the creator. And we move the parent or whoever is rescuing into a coach. And this flip of the drama triangle can help to empower our learners in the right mindset so that they can be successful. This next one is known as the Pygmalion effect. It's also known as the self-fulfilling prophecy. And essentially, it's the fact that people become who they think you believe they are. So learners will rise to the expectations of their environment, especially a teacher's expectations. And what will happen is subconsciously at a deep level, if there is a high expectation from a teacher, there are different words that we use. There's different nonverbal cues that we give off that ultimately shape the belief of the learner. And when we have this belief and this high expectation for our learners, then we can really shape what type of person that they are becoming. And what we can do is frame this in terms of our identity, not just outcomes. So what we do constantly is affirm things like, hey, you're the kind of person who finishes what you start. You're becoming someone who doesn't give up. So what we say, what we believe about our child, especially in struggle, it really sets the ceiling for them. And one of the ways we do that at Treign Up Academy is we have this, the language that we use. So we're not allowed to use words like kids. They are learners. They are heroes. They are overcomers and conquerors. So the language that we promote across the environment is really important for that. This last model around identity and character is known as the Locus of Control. And it answers this key question of where do I believe control over my life comes from? If you're an internal locus of control, you believe that you shape your life by your actions. If you have an external locus of control, you believe your life is determined by other systems or luck. And what we try to do at Treign Up Academy is really foster this internal focus. We do that through things like contracts and choices. We allow them to fail and reflect. So this locus of control goes back to this idea of the drama triangle and others where do we view us as a victim where things are happening to us? Are we more like a thermostat, which is able to change by our own conscious decisions what the temperature is in the room and affect the things around us? So this next phase is we're actually going to the love of learning, which is one of our outcomes. And again, at a high level idea, what we're trying to move our learners from is moving from passive learning to active learning. I'm excited to walk through what all the science and research says about this. And the first one is known as the learning pyramid. And as you can see at the top there, the learning pyramid has this number of 5%. And these percentages are all about retention rates. The top half is more passive teaching, and the bottom half are more participatory. These percentages are not perfect, but they are directionally correct. And I think something that we see true, I'm sure you see this true in your day to day, that when we hear something, especially if someone is lecturing to us, we do not retain that information very well. However, if I were to try to teach somebody else that same topic, the retention is at closer to 90%. And again, not exact percentages, but directionally correct. And this is shown through things like the Feynman technique, where as I'm trying to teach somebody, if I'm trying to teach someone and I try to do it in a way like it's a third grader, I try to simplify it as much as I can. What I find out quickly is the gaps of knowledge that I have while I'm teaching. And that allows me to think more critically about the topic at hand. And one of the things that I love about Treign Up Academy is this multi-age studio framework, which provides an opportunity, again, where the teacher is not having to teach. We provide the recipes at the right time for the learners, but the learners themselves, especially the older ones within the studio, get the opportunity to help mentor and teach and tutor. And the more that we can get them used to teaching others themselves from a peer-to-peer lens, the more that they are able to practice that critical thinking, problem solving, and better retain information that is and knowledge that is key, important for what they're learning about. The next model is known as the 70-20-10 method, and this is more of an adult learning model, and I think is very applicable to elementary, primary ages as well. And I believe that children and adults are more similar than we let on and that we think. What we find in the 70-20-10 is that we can optimize an environment for learning by providing 70% of the time dedicated to learning something to be more project-based. So something that is being built that they care about. 70% of our time designated towards that. 20% of our time is designated for peer-to-peer feedback and interaction. And then 10% is what you might find is the more common lecture information that is important and necessary to build whatever it is that you're building. And the way that we approach that is not through teachers teaching, but providing the recipes at the right moment in time while they are building in little chunks. So that is the 70-20-10. And it really fits well, I think, with this idea of stacks of knowledge versus flows of knowledge, which I don't think is a model that we present today. So I'll talk about it here for just a few seconds. Stacks of knowledge are these truths that we know, information that doesn't change a ton, and trying to learn via these stacks of knowledge versus learning in the flow of work. This idea of flow of knowledge, I think, is really important, because what we want to do is build things. And the more that we're building, the more engaged we are and the more creative that we are being. We're learning way more during that time. And when we get stuck during that building process is when we want to have the right recipe or information at that point in time. And so a lot of adult theory of the future of work and the future of learning is moving more from, in the past, what have been known as stacks of knowledge, and moving to flows of knowledge to help increase retention. The next is known as the 2 sigma problem. And this is one that many of you have probably heard of at this point. It's becoming more and more prevalent. People are getting more excited about this with the rise of technology and improvements in artificial intelligence. And this comes from Dr. Benjamin Bloom. And Dr. Benjamin Bloom did this study where essentially he found and compared the more conventional types of learning and the results from conventional learning compared to those who did one-on-one tutoring. And they found this 2 standard deviation difference between those that had tutoring and those that went through a more conventional learning. And the reason people are excited about this is because many believe that AI is the future of learning. And now they think that because now everyone is able to have a tutor at the palm of their fingers. That is available today. And that is something that we believe into. It's going to be hard to compete, replicate uh, the power of AI at the fingertips of an individual versus your standard traditional educational model. And we're going to see those that have these tutors, which we believe need to be done well in terms of how the AI is built and make sure that there's limited bias in there, because they will have the potential to be highly persuasive because that is some information they're consuming, again, can shape the individual. So we want to make sure that we do that well. But if we can, we are going to see great improvements in educational outcomes. And that is one of the reasons why Treign Up Academy it utilizes technology. For that reason, for the tutoring, self-paced nature that technology can provide. And we're excited about what will happen there. The IKEA effect is one of the last ones that we'll talk about for this move from active to passive and the love of learning. And basically, what this says is if you build something, you're more likely to like it. And so, what we try to do at the Academy is we want to, for many different reasons, one of them being a motivational truth, that people that build it love it. And so, what we provide is the environment where the learners get to create their studio. So they get to create their contracts. They get to just make decisions constantly about what is in the environment, what are the things that they want to do for that day, and we provide these level of choices within, I would say, guardrails that we put up. So it's not some free for all, but by allowing the learners to take more control and ownership of their environment and in their studio, the more they love being there, the more engaged they're going to be with all of the work that they're pursuing. So the next one is a combo here of 21st century skills and athletic development. And we'll talk through the nature of information knowledge and the nature of and first principles of skill acquisition. And both are linked here. And again, the high level move that we are communicating to our learners is moving from just knowledge to really developing skills. And we think that this is an important distinction to make. This next one is known as hard and soft skills, and this is a differentiation I think this is important. And what I'll start with is, in my experience working with companies, many of them have been trying to create what's known as an adaptation advantage within their company, where they see learning, being able to upskill and reskill quickly, more quickly than their competitors, is a competitive advantage. And they're realizing that the half-life of skills, so the skills that are expected and valuable in the marketplace, are shifting dramatically month to month, even in some instances, with the rise of technology and artificial intelligence. And so many companies are having a hard time trying to define what skills are, how they relate differently between competencies, capabilities, and there's a whole lexicon language issue that many companies struggle with. And so this visual just kind of helps us to think about where skills fits into the larger picture and where knowledge fits in. Knowledge is something that underpins all of it. That's there at the bottom. Knowledge is needed for skills. Skills are needed for competencies, and competencies are needed for these larger capabilities or whole jobs that provide value to, other people in the marketplace. So knowledge underpins it all, but if knowledge is not used, it's lost. And what we want to move from, and the traditional educational approach focuses too much on just the information and the knowledge, and they don't always link the knowledge with the skills, because again, if it's not used, it's going to be lost. And so what we want to do is focus on what are the skills that are going to be needed, necessary for this next generation in the future? And how do we link the knowledge they need so that they can use that regularly to develop these skills that are really important? And when we think about skills, skills are separated between hard and soft skills. Hard skills are the types of skills you might think through. They're more technical. It's being able to program. They're programming, cooking, things that you are doing that are very easily measurable and able to provide proficiency levels around. Then there's soft skills. And these soft skills are skills that are more about uh, interactions with others. And so there are things like leadership and communication. They also can be about how you manage yourself. So there's things like, can you manage time? Are you a productive person? Um, these are distinct areas of skills. And what makes soft skills hard is sometimes many of them can be harder to measure, but they're just as important. And when we think about the future of skills, which we'll have another deep dive on, what are the necessary skills that will set our learners up for success in the future? It's more of these soft skills that are going to become more and more valuable. And so we take a big focus on these soft skills and the realization that you can't develop these soft skills unless you do them consistently and regularly. So things like leadership, you don't learn how to be a leader by just being in the classroom taking notes. You have to go and do, you have to reflect, going back to the 70-20-10 concept. So this visual is hopefully helpful for us and for you to distinguish between this whole lexicon of uh, around skills, and for you to see the distinction between hard versus soft skills, and why there is a large emphasis at our school on the softer skills. This next model is, I guess it is a model. It's from research. I'm not going to try to pronounce his name, but essentially what this research and study pointed to has become known as the forgetting curve. And I think this is important for us, again, looking back at how the traditional education model approaches things with this memorize, take the test, but don't use it again for weeks, months, years. I know the idea is that knowledge is supposed to progress so that you're always going back and using it, but that's not the case often. I especially think about things like history, where we memorize facts about a certain time period, but then don't really ever go back and think about it, especially for those who don't necessarily care about that, a certain time period, or not inclined to be a history junkie. So anyways, going back to the forgetting curve, what this means is that when you learn something, especially lecture wise, you have, let's say it's 100% retention in that moment and immediately. But just after the course of 20 minutes to 1 to 2 hours, you have lost upwards of 50% of that knowledge and information. And that's really important. And this is important, again, thinking back to traditional education. If it's not used, it's lost. And so a lot of our time in the traditional education system is focused on information and knowledge, and it's not about developing skill. And what happens a lot of times is just that time is wasted, and we don't realize that knowledge oftentimes is not kept. It is released by the brain. And this information processing model seems complex. I'm going to try my best to walk through it with us, but it's fairly straightforward, and I think many of us can understand what this means. That this is basically what neuroscience tells us about how learning actually happens. This is the stages that every learner's brain must go through for something to move from just exposure to understanding to mastery. And when we don't respect these stages, learning is shallow, it's easily forgotten. But when we do, the learning information can stick, transforms and becomes useful to us. So this first stage, stimuli to sensory memory, basically all learning begins with stimuli, something that we hear, something we see, or something we experience. It enters us through the sensory memory, but it only lasts a couple of seconds. And the gatekeeper here is attention and focus. If we're not paying attention, it disappears. If think about all the stimulus that's constantly around us, all the noise that's around us. You think of a face in the crowd or a sound in a noisy room. It's only when we are attentive and we focus that we move to the working memory. And so if something captures our attention, it moves to working memory. This is where the learner starts to think about the idea, but working memory is limited. We can only hold about 4 to 7 items for 20 to 30 seconds. If it's not processed or repeated, it's forgotten. And one of the things, how we do things differently at Treign Up Academy is we allow learners the space and structure to really wrestle with ideas and not just rush past them. So we get into short-term memory if we're attentive and focused on a certain area, but the only way to get into our long-term is if it's encoded. Oftentimes, to encode, the best thing we can do is to connect with it in new ways. We have to discuss it, we have to feel it, or we have to apply it. There's this part about the retrieval that helps with encoding too. And if there's another concept that's known as spaced repetition, where to help with that forgetting curve, if one of the best things to do is after I hear it, after a class, let's say, within the first 5 to 10 minutes after class, I try my best to retrieve that information and usually teach or think through it myself. And then I try to do that again at maybe the 2 hour mark, and then maybe the next day. Then there's 2 weeks later. If I can have what's known as the spaced repetition of learning, and where I'm constantly retrieving it, it helps with this encoding and moving this information knowledge both into long term, but also keeping it in the short term. So especially if it's valuable or useful, that is something that we want to do. And ultimately, what we want to do is have it in storage where it's easily retrievable so that we can transfer it when it matters, especially in new and different situations. So very technical there, but I think this is an important model that helps reinforce this idea that memorizing for tests and then we often forget, right? And I think of the videos that I'm sure you've seen them. You go into a college, or these people that record will go to a college and they'll interview different people and they'll ask very simple questions like civics questions, like who was the third president of the United States? And so many people do not know that answer. And the reason they don't know it is because they haven't thought about it in years. It's not that they haven't been taught it. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of how our brains function and work. If we don't use it, it's often lost. The next one, again, is a little technical, and I apologize for that, but it's about association. And so one of the most overlooked truths about learning is that the brain does not store information like a filing cabinet. It stores it like a web. So what we want to do when we're learning is we want to make connections between ideas and experiences, emotions, and past knowledge. This is what's known as association. So some of the things I have there for you to visualize are like Hebbian learning. Basically means that neurons that fire together wire together. So anytime that two ideas are experienced together, the brain forms a neural link. And when you repeat that experience, the connection strengthens. So for example, going back to like maybe even our scars and scripts model, if a child regularly experiences struggle with encouragement, their brains wire that together. If they experience struggle and shame, their brain wires struggle with danger. And so I thought that was interesting and related to the idea of association. The next one is the schema theory. So new learning must hook onto something that is old. Um, a schema is like a mental framework file folder. The brain makes sense of new information by attaching it to what it already understands. It's very much like Legos. So, what we want to do is help them build upon pre existing knowledge. One of the concepts that we're in many ways talking about here, I have not focused on, is the idea of mental models. And many of these that I've shown you would be considered mental models. But this stems from someone known as they write a blog called the Feynman Street blog, I believe. Farnham Street blog is what it's called. And he did a lot of research into Warren Buffett and Charles Munger. And what he found is throughout their years of highly successful investing career is that they thought within mental models. And Charles Munger talks about having this lattice work of frameworks where to make better decisions, we have these fundamental first principles of what's true about these different areas of life, from biology to economics and finance to psychology. And if you can have these models and you're able to connect them together, can be very deadly in terms of your decision making. And the best way to build this model is this, he called it a lattice work of frameworks, almost like a web where they're all connected. And so um, association is essentially uh, a first principle about how we learn, right? And so it's important that what we're learning is connected. And the way we do that at Treign Up Academy is that we're not just memorizing facts. What we're doing is we're, we're allowing them to have experiences where they're able to build things, where they have choice involved. And especially in things like history, we combine the civilization, what we call history, and the stories. We put them in the stories. It's usually related to the thing that they're building at the time, and we allow association to happen naturally. Because if things are happening compartmentalized, that learning does not stick. All right, this is less of a model and more research, but I think it's important as we think about how we are assessing and evaluating our success. And one of the things I think is important for people to know about is what's known as grade inflation. And so for decades, we've used grades like A's, B's, and C's as our main tool to measure success. But the problem is that much of this has become meaningless. Um, I wouldn't say meaningless, but it's more reflective of just the effort and compliance, not actually the mastery of skills or understanding. And grade inflation, as you can kind of see, is just essentially that over time, there's been a number of studies around this. Yale did another one recently that pointed to this as well. But in the 1950s, it was only like 10% of people that got A's, and today it's nearly 80%. So it's not really this GPA grade inflation. It's not a mark of excellence anymore. It's more just of the norm, and and we think it's important to notice this as sometimes the parents are concerned about how we're evaluating, and we get it. This is, again, the softer skills can be hard to evaluate, but when we think about this, and when Acton thinks about this, one of the things that we see is that if I were to try to apply for Google right now, they're not even worried about where I went to school. The questions they ask, they want to know if I can do what I say I'm going to do. And they're going to ask me, what's your portfolio of work, especially if I'm something like a programmer. And so what matters most now is for me to be able to show the type of work that I've done. And because of that, what we use now at Treign Up Academy are badges to track skill mastery. We utilize exhibitions to demonstrate real world application. We do have these portfolio of works that we have that show depth and improvement over time that somebody can hand off and over to somebody who wants to hire them and say, hey, here are the things that I've built. Here's what I do. And I'm happy to be able to teach you or talk through it all because I'm an expert in it. And so grades, they're just shallow. They're temporary labels, but mastery is deep, transferable growth. And we're not trying to produce honor roll kids. We want to train, develop capable, self-aware learners who know how to fail, grow, and lead. And this next one is, again, just a more research, I would say, that points to this fundamental truth that knowledge, in this way we're just using IQ, is not everything. There is this wide swath of more important things. If you look here, there's like things like social skills, conscientiousness, toughness, perseverance, grit. These things actually drive more to success and quality of life than just IQ. The last one here for this section of 21st century skills and athletic development is around block and random learning, training, I should say. So let's use the example of basketball. Let's say your child is learning how to do basketball. Is your option A is blocked, where you might do 50 free throws in a row. You do 20 layups from the same side. Your practice feels smooth, predictable, confident. That's more block-like training. Then there's option B, which is known as random training, random practice, where you're catching on the move, you're dribbling under pressure, you're shooting from different shots. Defenders show up in the middle of the drill. The coach is mixing it up. Which one do you feel would be more frustrating? Certainly option B. Many coaches take the block approach because it looks good and you can evaluate things more easily. But what's interesting about this is hopefully you can tell through the visual here, is that the block random have similar trajectories in terms of their improvements through the different trainings, pre-test, acquisition tests. But the transfer is most important. So when I work with coaches, I ask the question all the time, are you doing things to look good? Or are you doing things that's optimized for you to perform your best on the field? Oftentimes our training, our practices do not transfer from practice to higher performance on the field. And what this research points to, this is from Train Ugly, which is a great YouTube video series that I came across a number of years ago. What we find there is it's actually the random training that actually transfers better. And the reason that I like this model is this is some evidence to support the messiness. Right now, traditional education is very clean. It's clear cut. It makes us feel good about these different, trainings, GPAs, testings that we do. And then there's Treign Up Academy, which is much messier. And it's harder in some ways to evaluate. But what we see is that there's almost like this block and random training, especially when it comes to skill acquisition, that at the very least, it's not that block training is always wrong, but that the random training, the messiness, when done right and well, leads to higher transfer. And ultimately, that's what we want to do at the school. I hate this term, but as we prepare them for the real world, we want what we're doing in school to transfer to that so that they can be successful. And the reason I hate that is because that term, preparing them for the real world, is because that's not what we're doing. They are individuals, they are persons who have meaningful work to do right now. They have meaningful work that they can do right now, even at 5 or 6 years old. And we want to give them the opportunity to do that. And we might think it's silly, but they don't. And ultimately what matters there is the engagement. We want them to build things that they're interested in, that they're engaged with. And through that engagement, instead of wasting time on things that they don't care about, that they're just going to forget, we can leverage their engagement for them to, number one, find the things that they love, care about, their calling, which is important to us. But also to ensure that they are retaining and really acquiring the skills, I should say, acquiring the skills that are going to be important for them to succeed now, not just in the future. All right, our last section here is really just about some acting systems and generally some models around environment. The first one is known as the power of moment. So when you think about your own childhood, sorry, this again relates back to kind of like the scripts and these scars. But if you think about your own childhood, you don't remember every day of school, but you remember moments. The time that you stood up and you spoke, the time that you failed publicly and recovered, the time someone affirmed something deep in you. The truth is, transformation doesn't happen in average days. It happens in defining moments. And these moments can be designed. And at Treign Up Academy, that's what we're trying to do. And there's this model just provides from this book by Dan and Chip Heath, these four elements. There's elevation, insight, pride, and connection. And I won't go into the details on each, but just know that you can read the book, but this is a model that we use to try to create moments that matter. And one of the ways that we do that at Treign Up Academy, we have a boyhood, girlhood track, because we do believe that they are different and they need to be trained differently. There is something that we have for fathers and sons called the tournament. And at the tournament, there is this kind of rite of passage that we create for our boys right now, where the father gets in front of a community of men around a fire and they speak to the community of men and to their son about the 1 to 2 characteristics that they want to affirm in them that they see that is good. And it's amazing. We have a whole weekend designed around that one event and how powerful that event can be to share, deepen the bonds between the two, and to build a moment that will not, it just isn't forgotten and is meaningful to the families that have gone through that. All right, the next one's called Levine's equation. I came across this in our psychological warfare training, and very straightforward. One of the reasons why I love it, and it just essentially states that behavior is a function of a person and their environment. And what this means is that if I can shape the behavior by shaping the environment. And as we see this all the time, people coming to our school that had different behaviors in traditional education, but now that they're in this new environment, there's new behaviors. And the relationship between these three really affect the person. So the person can affect the environment, which can affect behavior, but I can also maneuver and have levers in the environment that shape behaviors, which shape ultimately the person as well. This next one is known as the 6 sources of influence. And this is another model that I love. It shows the power of not just um, the individual level of how we can influence behavior, but also structural components, the environment, and the social element. This is something that we often don't leverage as leaders within the educational space, as we forget the power of peers. And so what we want to try to do is leverage peers and help them to hold each other accountable, which is really hard to do, especially for, honestly, it's hard in different ways between elementary, middle, and high school. But if you can do that well, you can create a very fun environment that has very high standards. One of the ways this has worked out just this year, even with my own son, is last year, Cohen was not able to read and he just wasn't abundantly interested in it. But this past year, being at Treign Up Academy, all of his friends started reading this new series of books, and they were all talking about it. And he got really, enthralled by this, and his motivation to learn skyrocketed, and he was able to learn how to read within a matter of 4 to 5 months, just one semester basically of the school. And he's got ways to go still, but it's a great example of what can happen when all the peers are aligned, motivated, and are doing things that they care about. And it's things that are also important to what we want to see within the school. So there's the social element. The structural piece, again, we talked about Levine's equation just a second ago, but the power of the environment. When we shape environment, we shape behaviors. One example of this is a story that I'll share from a scientist who on Halloween night um, put out a bowl of apples and candy. And so he went back inside, and after the course of half the night, maybe an hour or two, he went back outside and counted the number of candies that were taken versus apples. And, um, 95% of the kids who came there took the candy. Now, what he did next was interesting. He changed one thing in the environment. He put a poster of Batman biting into an apple on the front door. He went back inside, and then he just counted how many how many kids that were trick or treating picked the apples versus the candy. And just from that simple change in the environment, he was able to shift their thinking to not their thinking, basically the outcomes that the behaviors that the kids exhibited from 95% of the kids that took the candy to only 55% that took the candy. 45% took the apple. So it's a great example, fun story and study just about the power of the environment and the structure that they're in. The last two here that we'll end on is self-determination theory. This is centered around motivation, and it basically says that we're more motivated. We have these basic needs of autonomy, competence, and connectedness. And if we can have all three of these, then we're going to be more motivated with these psychological needs met. Autonomy is this idea that I have choice. Competence is this idea that I'm growing and developing and improving. And the third is connectedness, where there's some sort of social component to it. And as you know, this is a learner-driven model, which means that there is a lot of opportunity for choice to happen. There's multiple options for learners to select, and they get to learn for themselves that choices have consequences. Lord Acton is what Acton Academy and methodology is coined off of. And essentially, he was big on the idea of freedom and responsibility. If you wanted to have freedom, if you wanted to have all these freedoms handed to you, you had to be responsible enough for it. And we talk about that a lot, this balance between freedom and responsibility. And when we're not responsible, that freedoms are taken away, that there are consequences for that. But autonomy is a key part of the environment that we've created, and are excited to see how that continues to flourish and drive growth within the learners we have. And the last one is really around our calendar, and is based off of Agile methodology, which some of you might have heard before. Agile methodology is just a type of project management approach that is utilized mostly in developing software. And what we have currently for our calendar is, and for active methodology, is a 6-week on, 1 week off cycle. And Naval Ravikant has a quote that says that we should work like lions, not like cows. So the idea, the reason why we have our calendar set up this way is because every 6-week session there is there's a quest, there is a project that the learners are working on, and at the end there's this exhibition to show what they've built. And what the idea here is that they sprint like a lion, devouring their prey, and working hard and diligently for that 6 weeks, and then there's a break after their exhibition. And it's very similar. The idea in Agile methodology is that workers come together and they build in different iterations. Usually they're in 2-week cycles, but they'll take a sprint, it's just 2 weeks. They'll build, they'll reflect, they'll show it to their product owner or the client, and they'll say, hey, how does this MVP look? And then they get feedback, and then they work on another cycle. And so this is, again, a model on how current work is being done, especially within the software development phase, and shows how it's related to and how it drives the decisions around how our calendar works. Again, all of these models, the purpose of them are to help you to better understand the why. And so this idea of sprints within Agile methodology is the why behind our calendar for the year. So I hope that you all enjoyed that. We hope that it was helpful for you. I'm sure it was probably too much information, but what you can go to, you can go back as you are going through the different experiences as a parent, trying to help support your learner, and you can come back to these and just try to better remember the why and try to institute some of these concepts in your home. All right. Thank you. And see you again soon for another deep dive into our Treign Up Academy methodology.